Samuel Crawford stood on the cracked wooden porch of his family's ranch house, watching the last of his cattle disappear behind a cloud of dust. The buyer's truck grew smaller on the horizon, taking with it the final remnants of 3 generations of hard work. His weathered hands gripped the porch railing as he calculated the meager sum in his pocket against the mounting bills scattered across his kitchen table. The drought had lasted 18 months, turning his once green pastures into cracked earth that resembled broken pottery. Wells that had never run dry in his grandfather's time now yielded nothing but dust and disappointment. Samuel had watched his herd dwindle from 200 head to just 50, then 20, and now none at all. Each sale had been a small death, a piece of his soul traded for temporary survival. At 35, Samuel had expected to be building his legacy, not watching it crumble. His father had died 5 years earlier, leaving him the ranch and a mountain of debt that seemed to grow larger each month. The bank notices arrived with clockwork precision, each one more threatening than the last. Foreclosure loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, dark and inevitable. The neighboring ranchers whispered about Samuel's situation over coffee at the local diner. Some offered sympathy, others spoke of the changing times and how small operations couldn't survive anymore. A few had made offers to buy his land at prices far below its worth, their eyes gleaming with opportunity, while maintaining expressions of neighborly concern. Samuel's pride had kept him from accepting charity, but pride wouldn't pay the bills or save the ranch. His mother's wedding ring, sold 6 months ago, had bought him time but not salvation. The antique furniture that had belonged to his grandmother had followed piece by piece, until the house felt hollow and empty, like a shell of its former self. The isolation had become unbearable. His few remaining friends had grown tired of his constant worry and inability to join them for drinks or dinner. Dating seemed impossible when he could barely afford to feed himself, let alone take someone out for a proper meal. The loneliness pressed down on him like a physical weight, especially during the long evenings when silence filled every corner of the empty house. That evening, as Samuel sat at his kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills, he made a decision that would have shocked his father. He opened his laptop, an old machine that took several minutes to start up, and began typing a personal advertisement. The idea had been growing in his mind for weeks, born of desperation and a strange conversation he'd overheard at the feed store. 2 ranchers had been discussing arranged marriages, how common they'd been in their grandfather's time. Practical unions where both parties benefited, where survival mattered more than romance. One had mentioned reading about modern women who sought exactly such arrangements, tired of city life and empty relationships, looking for purpose and genuine partnership. Samuel stared at the blank screen for an hour before he began typing. He described himself honestly. A struggling rancher, 35 years old, owner of 800 acres of good land that just needed rain and livestock to prosper again. He explained his situation without self-pity, mentioning the drought, the debt, and his determination to rebuild what his family had lost. He outlined what he could offer: a home, a partnership in rebuilding something meaningful, and a chance to live close to the land in a way that few people experienced anymore. He admitted his need for someone who could contribute financially to their shared venture, someone who understood that their arrangement would be built on mutual benefit, rather than romantic love, though he hoped affection might grow over time. The advertisement felt strange under his fingers, like he was trading away pieces of his future to save what remained of his past. He read it over dozens of times, adding and deleting words, trying to strike the right balance between honesty and hope. Finally, exhausted and running out of time before the bank's deadline, he posted it on 3 different websites that specialized in practical partnerships and alternative relationships. Samuel didn't expect immediate responses, but his inbox filled quickly with messages from women across the country. Some were clearly inappropriate, seeking adventure or fantasy rather than genuine partnership. Others seemed sincere but impractical. City women who romanticized rural life without understanding its harsh realities. Then he received a message from Margaret Thompson, a 42-year-old woman from Chicago, who described herself as financially secure but lonely. She owned a successful catering business and had inherited money from her late parents, but she wrote about feeling empty, despite her material success. Her message was straightforward and practical, asking detailed questions about the ranch, the climate, and his specific financial needs. Margaret attached a photo that showed a woman with kind eyes and a generous figure. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but her smile seemed genuine, and something about her expression suggested strength and reliability. In her second message, she revealed that she'd been married before to a man who'd valued her money more than her heart, and she was looking for a partnership based on honesty rather than pretense. Their correspondence continued for 3 weeks, with messages growing longer and more detailed each day. Margaret asked about his daily routines, his plans for rebuilding the herd, and his expectations for their partnership. She shared stories about her business, her love of cooking, and her childhood dreams of living on a farm. Gradually, Samuel began to see her as a real person, rather than just a solution to his problems. Margaret made a surprising proposal in her 15th message. She would come to visit for a week to see the ranch and meet Samuel in person. If they both felt comfortable, she would provide the funds needed to save the property and restock it with cattle, and they would marry within a month. She suggested a business partnership formalized by marriage, with clear agreements about finances and responsibilities. Samuel read her proposal 3 times before responding. The arrangement felt surreal, like something from a different century, but it also felt like his only hope. The bank had scheduled a foreclosure meeting for the following month, and his options had dwindled to nothing. Margaret seemed intelligent, kind, and refreshingly honest about what she wanted from their arrangement. He wrote back accepting her proposal, and they scheduled her visit for the following week. As Samuel cleaned his neglected house and tried to make it presentable, he felt a mixture of hope and terror. Everything would change when Margaret arrived, and he couldn't predict whether that change would save him or complicate his life beyond repair. The woman arriving on his doorstep would either be his salvation or another challenge he wasn't prepared to handle. Margaret Thompson stepped off the Greyhound bus at the tiny station that served Samuel's county, her designer luggage looking out of place among the weathered locals. She wore a simple blue dress that flattered her full figure, and comfortable shoes that suggested practicality over fashion. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried herself with the confidence of a successful businesswoman, though Samuel detected nervous energy in the way she fidgeted with her purse strap. Samuel waited by his pickup truck, cleaned and polished for the first time in months. He'd spent the morning rehearsing conversations in his head, but seeing Margaret in person left him tongue-tied. She was exactly as he'd imagined, yet completely different, more substantial and real than any photograph could convey. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but cautious, and her eyes took in everything with an appraising look that made him feel like a property being evaluated. The drive to the ranch gave them their first opportunity for real conversation. Margaret asked about the drought, the local economy, and the neighboring ranches with questions that showed she'd done her research. Samuel pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area's history, gradually relaxing as he realized she was genuinely interested rather than just being polite. When they reached the ranch house, Margaret stood quietly for several minutes, taking in the weathered buildings, the empty corrals, and the vast expanse of parched land stretching to the horizon. Samuel watched her face anxiously, trying to read her thoughts as she surveyed what would potentially become her new home. Her expression revealed nothing, but she walked the property with purposeful steps, asking practical questions about water sources, fencing, and soil quality. Inside the house, Margaret's business instincts became more apparent. She examined the kitchen with particular interest, opening cabinets and testing the water pressure with the expertise of someone who understood food preparation on a large scale. She noted the house's good bones beneath its current shabbiness, commenting on the solid construction and the potential for modernization without losing its character. That evening, over a simple dinner Samuel had prepared with unusual care, they discussed the practical details of their arrangement. Margaret was refreshingly direct about money, explaining that she could provide $50,000 immediately to pay off the most pressing debts and purchase a starter herd. She had another $100,000 available for improvements and expansion, but she wanted to see how they worked together before committing the larger sum. Samuel found her businesslike approach both relieving and slightly disappointing. Part of him had hoped for some spark of attraction or romance, but Margaret treated their potential marriage like a merger between two companies. She outlined her expectations clearly. She would handle finances and long-term planning while Samuel managed daily operations and livestock care. She wanted separate bedrooms initially, time to adjust to rural life, and clear agreements about decision-making responsibilities. Margaret spent 3 days touring the area, meeting neighbors, and learning about the local community. She impressed the banker with her financial credentials and her realistic assessment of the ranch's potential. She visited the feed store, the veterinary clinic, and the livestock auction, introducing herself as Samuel's potential business partner with a confidence that made everyone take notice. The neighboring ranchers were curious about this city woman who might save Samuel's property. Some were skeptical, questioning whether someone from Chicago could adapt to ranch life, while others appreciated her straightforward manner and obvious intelligence. Margaret handled their questions with grace, neither claiming expertise she didn't possess nor apologizing for her urban background. On her 4th day, Margaret made her decision. She found Samuel repairing fence in the back pasture and told him simply that she wanted to proceed with their arrangement. She'd spoken with her lawyer in Chicago and would transfer the initial funds within a week of their marriage. She suggested they marry at the courthouse with minimal ceremony, treating it as the business arrangement it essentially was. Samuel felt relief mixed with unexpected disappointment at her matter-of-fact approach. He'd begun to hope that genuine affection might develop between them, but Margaret seemed determined to keep their relationship strictly practical. Still, she represented his only chance to save the ranch, and he wasn't in a position to be particular about romance. They planned a simple wedding for the following Saturday, with just 2 witnesses from town and a brief reception at the local diner. Margaret returned to Chicago to settle her affairs and arrange the money transfer, leaving Samuel to clean up legal details and prepare for her permanent arrival. The week passed quickly, filled with paperwork and nervous anticipation. Margaret returned on Friday with a moving truck containing her essential belongings and business equipment. She'd sold her catering business to her assistant and closed her Chicago apartment, burning bridges with characteristic decisiveness. Samuel helped her unpack boxes that revealed her personality more clearly than their conversations had. Professional cooking equipment, business books, financial records, and family photographs that showed her softer side. The wedding ceremony was brief and businesslike, performed by a justice of the peace who seemed puzzled by their lack of romantic displays. Margaret wore a simple gray suit, Samuel his best jeans and a new shirt, and they exchanged rings with handshakes rather than kisses. The few guests seemed uncomfortable with the arrangement's obvious practicality, but nobody questioned it directly. At the diner reception, Margaret surprised everyone by revealing her cooking skills. She'd arranged to prepare the meal herself, creating dishes that transformed the simple restaurant into something approaching fine dining. Her beef roast with herbs, homemade bread, and elaborate desserts impressed the locals and began changing their perception of her from odd outsider to valuable community member. That evening, as they returned to the ranch house as husband and wife, the awkwardness of their arrangement became more apparent. Margaret had claimed the guest bedroom, hanging her clothes in its small closet with military precision. Samuel helped her arrange her furniture and office equipment, maintaining polite conversation, while both avoided discussing the obvious strangeness of their situation. Before retiring, Margaret handed Samuel a check for $50,000 and detailed financial plans she'd prepared during her week in Chicago. Her projections showed how they could rebuild the herd, improve the property, and achieve profitability within 3 years. The numbers were conservative but achievable, based on careful research and realistic assumptions about cattle prices and operating costs. Samuel stared at the check, overwhelmed by its reality and what it represented. For the first time in 2 years, he felt hope instead of desperation. Margaret had kept her promise, providing not just money but detailed planning that showed she was serious about their partnership's success. However, as he listened to her moving around in the next room, he wondered what kind of marriage they'd created and whether either of them would find happiness in such an arrangement. The house felt different with Margaret in it, no longer empty but not quite alive either. Samuel lay awake that night wondering if he'd made the right choice, grateful for the salvation she represented but uncertain about the cost to his dreams of finding genuine love and partnership. The first month of marriage brought unexpected challenges and small surprises that neither Samuel nor Margaret had anticipated. Margaret transformed the ranch house with efficient determination, ordering supplies online and tackling projects with the same intensity she'd once applied to her catering business. She installed new appliances in the kitchen, updated the plumbing, and painted rooms in warm colors that made the house feel like a home rather than a shelter. Samuel found her presence both helpful and unsettling. Margaret rose before dawn to prepare elaborate breakfasts that sustained him through long days of fence repair and pasture restoration. Her business skills proved invaluable when dealing with suppliers and contractors, negotiating prices with a shrewdness that saved them thousands of dollars. However, her city habits clashed with ranch rhythms in ways that created daily friction. Margaret insisted on maintaining her Chicago schedule, working on her laptop until midnight and sleeping until 8, missing the early morning hours when ranch work was most pleasant. She complained about the dust, the noise from neighboring properties, and the lack of reliable internet for her continued business consulting. Samuel noticed her growing frustration with rural isolation, though she tried to hide it behind determined cheerfulness. The cattle purchase became their first major test as partners. Samuel had identified a rancher in the next county willing to sell 40 head of young breeding stock at reasonable prices. Margaret insisted on accompanying him to evaluate the purchase, armed with research about cattle genetics and market trends that impressed the seller but annoyed Samuel, who felt his expertise was being questioned. Margaret's analytical approach clashed with Samuel's instinctive understanding of livestock. She questioned his choices based on spreadsheet projections while he relied on years of experience reading animal behavior and health indicators. Their disagreement became heated during the negotiation, with Margaret focused on price per pound, and Samuel concerned about the animal's breeding potential and adaptability to their land. Eventually, they reached a compromise that satisfied neither completely but moved them forward. Margaret approved the purchase price while Samuel selected the individual animals, but the tension between their different approaches remained unresolved. The cattle arrived the following week, and Samuel felt genuine joy watching them spread across his restored pastures. But Margaret's obvious discomfort with the animals' messiness and unpredictability troubled him. Community integration proved another challenge. The local women's auxiliary invited Margaret to join their monthly meetings, but her suggestions for modernizing their fundraising methods were met with polite resistance. She offered to cater their annual barbecue with sophisticated menu items that clashed with traditional expectations. Her good intentions were obvious, but her inability to understand rural social dynamics created awkward situations. Samuel watched Margaret's struggles with growing concern. She worked harder than anyone he knew, contributing far more than their agreement required. But she seemed increasingly unhappy, despite their partnership's obvious success. Her smiles became forced, her conversation focused exclusively on business matters, and she spent long hours alone in her room managing her remaining investments and consulting clients. The isolation affected Margaret more than she'd anticipated. In Chicago, she'd been surrounded by colleagues, clients, and the constant stimulation of city life. The ranch's quietness, which Samuel found peaceful, made her restless and anxious. She began taking long walks alone, returning with forced enthusiasm about the landscape's beauty while her body language suggested loneliness rather than appreciation. Their first real argument erupted over Margaret's decision to install a satellite dish without consulting Samuel. She'd ordered the equipment and arranged installation to improve their internet connection for her work, treating it as a necessary business expense. Samuel objected to the cost and the large dish's appearance, feeling his input should have been sought for decisions affecting their shared property. Margaret defended her action with cool logic, pointing out that her consulting work required reliable communication and that the improved connection would benefit their ranch operations too. Samuel couldn't argue with her reasoning, but her unilateral decision-making reminded him uncomfortably of her view of their marriage as primarily a business arrangement where efficiency mattered more than consultation. The argument revealed deeper tensions about decision-making authority and respect. Margaret had assumed her financial contributions gave her primary control over expenditures, while Samuel expected equal input on matters affecting their daily lives. Neither had clearly defined these boundaries during their courtship, and the oversight created ongoing friction. Despite these challenges, Samuel began noticing Margaret's softer qualities. She left coffee ready for him each morning, learned his preferences for meals, and showed genuine interest in the cattle's health and behavior. Her questions about ranch operations shifted from skeptical evaluation to curious learning, and she began offering practical suggestions that showed growing understanding of their shared enterprise. Margaret's cooking became a bridge between them. She prepared elaborate dinners that transformed their simple table into something approaching elegance, using local ingredients in sophisticated ways that pleased Samuel's practical palate, while satisfying her creative instincts. These shared meals became their most comfortable time together, when conversation flowed naturally, and their partnership felt genuine rather than forced. Samuel also recognized Margaret's loneliness and isolation. Remembering his own struggles with solitude during the ranch's decline, he began including her more in daily operations, teaching her to read cattle behavior and explaining his decision-making processes. Margaret proved an eager student, asking thoughtful questions and demonstrating surprising physical capability when helping with ranch work. Their relationship remained carefully polite, maintained through mutual respect rather than affection, but small moments suggested potential for something deeper. Margaret's rare laughter at Samuel's stories, her obvious pride when neighbors complimented their property's improvements, and her increasing comfort with rural life hinted at genuine connection beneath their business arrangement. However, Margaret's evening routine became increasingly puzzling to Samuel. She insisted on complete privacy after dinner, locking her bedroom door and remaining inside until morning. When he asked about her need for such security, she deflected his questions with vague references to city habits and the need for personal space. Her secrecy seemed excessive even for someone adjusting to shared living arrangements. Samuel respected her privacy, but wondered what Margaret did during those long evening hours behind her locked door. Sometimes he heard her moving around, occasionally talking on the phone in hushed tones, but she never emerged until morning. Her mysterious behavior added another layer of uncertainty to their already complex relationship, making him question how well he truly knew the woman he'd married. 3 months into their marriage, Samuel's curiosity about Margaret's locked room routine had grown into genuine concern. Her daytime personality remained warm and engaging, but her increasing secrecy after sunset created an atmosphere of mystery that affected their entire household. She had installed additional locks on her bedroom door and consistently deflected any questions about her evening, activities with skill that suggested long practice at avoiding difficult conversations. Margaret's behavior patterns became more pronounced as autumn approached. She would help with ranch work enthusiastically during daylight hours, discussing cattle management and property improvements with intelligence and genuine interest. However, as evening approached, her demeanor would shift subtly, becoming distracted and anxious until she could retreat to her locked sanctuary. Samuel noticed her checking her watch frequently after 4 o'clock, as if counting down to some important appointment. The mystery deepened when Samuel discovered that Margaret was receiving regular shipments of packages addressed to various false names. The deliveries arrived when he was working in distant pastures, and Margaret always intercepted them before he returned to the house. When he mentioned seeing delivery trucks, she claimed to be ordering household supplies and business materials, but her explanations seemed rehearsed and incomplete. Samuel's attempts to understand Margaret's secretive behavior led him to pay closer attention to details he'd previously overlooked. Her computer was always password protected and positioned so screens couldn't be viewed from doorways. Her phone calls were conducted in whispered tones behind closed doors. Most puzzling, she had requested that their internet usage not be monitored or tracked, claiming it was necessary for her consulting business's confidentiality requirements. The first real clue came when Samuel accidentally overheard a phone conversation through the thin wall between their bedrooms. Margaret was speaking with someone about schedules, payments, and what sounded like appointment times. Her voice carried an intimacy and warmth that he'd never heard in their personal conversations, suggesting a level of emotional connection that was absent from their marriage. When he tried to listen more carefully, Margaret seemed to sense his presence and immediately lowered her voice to inaudible whispers. Samuel's growing suspicions were complicated by his genuine affection for Margaret, which had developed despite their arrangement's practical origins. She had become an excellent partner in managing the ranch, contributing ideas and energy that made their operation more successful than he'd imagined possible. Her financial support had not only saved his property, but enabled improvements that positioned them for long-term prosperity. The thought that she might be deceiving him about something significant, felt like a betrayal of their growing trust. The situation became more troubling when Samuel noticed Margaret's mood changes correlating with her evening activities. Some mornings she appeared refreshed and energetic, while others found her distracted and emotionally distant. Her productivity and engagement seemed directly connected to whatever happened behind her locked door, suggesting that her secretive activities significantly impacted her well-being and their relationship. Samuel considered direct confrontation but worried about damaging their partnership over what might be innocent privacy needs. Margaret had never violated their explicit agreements, had contributed everything she'd promised financially, and had integrated into ranch life more successfully than either had expected. Her secretive behavior, while concerning, might be protecting something personal rather than something deceptive or harmful. However, Samuel's patience was tested when he discovered Margaret had been lying about her background in subtle but significant ways. During a conversation with her former Chicago neighbor, who had called looking for her, Samuel learned that Margaret's catering business had been much smaller than she'd claimed, and that she'd been involved in some unspecified controversy before leaving the city. When he mentioned this conversation to Margaret, her reaction was immediate and defensive, suggesting that her past contained complications she hadn't shared. Margaret's response to Samuel's questions revealed a quick temper and argumentative skills that surprised him. She deflected his concerns with accusations about his suspicious behavior and invasion of her privacy, turning the conversation away from her secrets to his alleged shortcomings as a husband. Her ability to redirect uncomfortable discussions suggested experience with confrontation and deception that made Samuel question how much of her presented personality was genuine. The tension between them escalated when Samuel discovered that Margaret was spending money on purchases she hadn't disclosed, despite their agreement to discuss all expenditures over a certain amount. Bank statements showed regular payments to companies he didn't recognize, along with cash withdrawals that couldn't be accounted for by household expenses. When confronted, Margaret claimed the payments were for consulting business expenses and personal items, but she refused to provide specifics. Samuel realized that Margaret's secretive behavior was affecting their business partnership as well as their personal relationship. Her distraction during important conversations, her reluctance to discuss long-term planning, and her obvious preoccupation with activities unrelated to their ranch suggested divided loyalties or commitments that competed with their shared goals. He began wondering whether Margaret viewed their
marriage as a temporary
arrangement or a convenient cover for other activities. The breaking point came when Samuel found Margaret's bedroom door, unlocked one evening, and glimpsed sophisticated computer equipment that far exceeded anything needed for business consulting. Multiple monitors, professional lighting equipment, and what appeared to be video recording devices suggested activities that required significant investment and technical expertise. Margaret discovered him looking and immediately locked the door, but her panicked reaction confirmed that her evening activities were both secretive and potentially compromising. Their confrontation that night was heated and inconclusive. Margaret accused Samuel of violating her privacy and betraying her trust, while Samuel demanded explanations for her deceptive behavior and mysterious activities. Neither yielded ground, and their argument ended with Margaret retreating to her locked room and Samuel sleeping in the barn, feeling like a stranger in his own home. The next morning brought an uneasy truce, with both acting as if their argument hadn't occurred, but the damage to their relationship was obvious. Margaret's cheerfulness seemed forced. Samuel's responses were curt and suspicious, and their previously comfortable partnership felt strained and artificial. The ranch work continued, but their collaboration lacked the easy cooperation that had developed over their first months together. Samuel spent the following days wrestling with his options. Confronting Margaret directly risked destroying their partnership and losing the financial support that had saved his ranch. However, tolerating her secretive behavior felt like accepting deception and potentially exposing himself to unknown risks. He found himself watching Margaret carefully, looking for clues about her true activities while maintaining the pretense of normal marriage and business partnership. Samuel's opportunity to uncover Margaret's secrets came unexpectedly on a Tuesday evening, when a severe thunderstorm knocked out power across their county. Margaret had been conducting her usual evening routine behind locked doors when the electricity failed, and Samuel heard her frustrated exclamation, followed by the sound of her door opening for the first time during evening hours since their marriage began. In the darkness, Samuel approached Margaret's room with a flashlight, ostensibly to check if she needed candles or battery-powered lighting. What he discovered through the briefly opened door shocked him beyond anything he'd imagined. Margaret's bedroom had been transformed into a sophisticated broadcasting studio, complete with professional cameras, lighting equipment, and multiple computer monitors that were now dark and useless without electricity. Margaret stood in the middle of the equipment, wearing an elaborate costume that bore no resemblance to her usual practical clothing. Silk lingerie, dramatic makeup, and accessories suggested she'd been engaged in some form of performance when the power failed. Her expression when she saw Samuel was a mixture of panic, embarrassment, and resignation, as if she'd always known this moment would come but hoped to delay it indefinitely. The initial silence stretched uncomfortably as both processed the implications of Samuel's discovery. Margaret's carefully constructed dual life had been exposed in the worst possible way, and Samuel struggled to reconcile the woman he'd married with the elaborate deception he'd uncovered. The sophisticated equipment represented a significant investment and suggested that whatever Margaret had been doing was both profitable and long established. Margaret's confession came slowly, delivered in the flickering candlelight of their kitchen table. After she'd changed into normal clothing and composed herself, she revealed that she'd been working as an online adult entertainer for over 5 years, building a substantial client base and earning far more money than her catering business had ever generated. Her move to the ranch hadn't ended her online career, but had simply relocated it to a more private setting. Samuel listened with growing amazement as Margaret explained her elaborate arrangements. The locked room contained equipment worth over $30,000, along with costumes, props, and makeup supplies that supported her online persona. She maintained regular schedules with clients who paid premium rates for private video sessions, and her earnings far exceeded what she'd contributed to their ranch partnership. Her secrecy had protected not just her privacy, but a substantial income stream that she'd been reluctant to abandon. Margaret's explanation revealed the complexity of her situation and motivations. Her previous marriage had ended when her husband discovered her online work and reacted with violence and threats that forced her to leave Chicago hastily. Her move to the ranch had been motivated partly by genuine desire for rural life, but primarily by the need for a secure location where she could continue her lucrative career without interference or discovery. Samuel's initial shock gave way to a mixture of admiration and betrayal as he absorbed Margaret's story. Her business acumen and financial success were impressive, far exceeding his own achievements, but her elaborate deception felt like a fundamental violation of their partnership. She had married him while maintaining a significant part of her life completely separate from their shared existence, suggesting a level of compartmentalization that challenged his understanding of their relationship. Margaret defended her secrecy by explaining the practical necessities of her situation. Adult entertainment work carried social stigma that could have destroyed their acceptance in the conservative rural community where they lived. Her clients expected consistency and privacy that would have been impossible if Samuel had known about her activities. Most importantly, her previous experience with male partners who became controlling or exploitative once they learned about her income had taught her to protect her independence. Carefully, the revelation reframed many aspects of their relationship that had puzzled Samuel. Margaret's financial resources, her insistence on separate bedrooms, her sophisticated computer equipment, and her mysterious evening routine all made sense within the context of her hidden career. Her genuine enthusiasm for ranch life hadn't been deceptive, but it had been only one part of a more complex reality that she'd been managing carefully. Samuel found himself struggling with conflicting emotions about Margaret's disclosure. His moral background made him uncomfortable with her profession, but he couldn't deny her business success or her right to make independent choices about her career. Her deception felt like betrayal, but her reasons for secrecy seemed practical and protective rather than malicious. Most confusing, her hidden income made her financial contributions to their ranch seem even more generous than he'd originally understood. Margaret's vulnerability during her confession was unlike anything Samuel had seen from her before. The confident businesswoman who'd managed their ranch finances and negotiated with suppliers disappeared, replaced by someone seeking understanding and acceptance for choices she'd made out of necessity, rather than preference. Her fear of Samuel's reaction was obvious, and her willingness to finally reveal her secrets suggested either trust in their relationship or resignation to its potential end. The conversation continued through the night as Margaret provided details about her work that helped Samuel understand its reality versus his preconceptions. She described her clients as mostly lonely men seeking companionship and fantasy, rather than anything explicitly sexual, though she acknowledged that her work existed in adult entertainment's gray areas. Her income averaged over $8,000 monthly, money that had funded not only her contributions to their ranch but improvements she'd made, without claiming credit. Samuel learned that Margaret's evening routine involved maintaining relationships with regular clients who'd followed her career for years. Some paid for simple conversation and companionship, others for more elaborate role-playing scenarios, but all expected consistency and personal attention that required significant time and emotional energy. Her work demanded performance skills that explained her ability to present different personalities for different situations. Margaret's disclosure also revealed the extent of her planning and preparation for their marriage. She'd researched the area's internet infrastructure, investigated local social dynamics, and calculated how to maintain her career while building a genuine partnership with Samuel. Her move to the ranch represented a carefully orchestrated transition rather than an impulsive escape from city life, though her growing attachment to rural living had become genuine and unexpected. As dawn approached, Samuel realized that Margaret's revelation changed everything about their relationship, while changing nothing about their daily reality. She remained the same person who'd helped save his ranch, who cooked elaborate meals and contributed intelligent ideas to their business planning. However, she was also someone who'd maintained an elaborate deception for months, whose income dwarfed his own, and whose career existed in a world he'd never encountered or understood. The question facing Samuel was whether he could accept Margaret's complete reality and continue their partnership with full knowledge of her hidden life, or whether her deception and profession represented insurmountable obstacles to their relationship's future development. The days following Margaret's revelation created an atmosphere of careful politeness between them that felt more strained than their previous comfortable partnership. Samuel found himself observing Margaret with new awareness, noticing details about her behavior and schedule that he'd previously overlooked. Her transformation from mysterious wife to revealed adult entertainer forced him to reconsider everything he thought he'd understood about their relationship and her motivations. Margaret, for her part, seemed relieved but anxious about Samuel's knowledge of her secret career. She no longer locked her bedroom door in the evenings, but maintained her work schedule with obvious nervousness about his reactions. Several times Samuel caught her watching him carefully, as if gauging his comfort level with her disclosed activities. Her usual confidence appeared shaken by vulnerability she hadn't expected to feel. Samuel's internal struggle was more complex than simple moral judgment about Margaret's profession. His conservative upbringing made him uncomfortable with adult entertainment, but his practical nature recognized her business success and financial independence. More troubling was his realization that Margaret's hidden income made her contributions to their ranch partnership seem almost charitable, raising questions about the balance of power and obligation in their relationship. The first test of their new dynamic came when Margaret's work schedule conflicted with an important cattle auction they'd planned to attend together. Samuel had looked forward to having her analytical skills help evaluate potential purchases, but Margaret had committed to a high-paying private session with a long-term client. Her apologetic explanation highlighted how her hidden career created competing priorities that affected their shared goals. Samuel attended the auction alone, fielding questions from neighbors about Margaret's absence with uncomfortable evasions. The experience reminded him of the social complexities Margaret's secret created for both of them. While he'd accepted her career intellectually, the practical implications of maintaining that secret within their close-knit community presented ongoing challenges he hadn't fully considered. Margaret's attempts to include Samuel in her hidden world created additional complications. She offered to show him her online platform and explain her client relationships, but Samuel found himself reluctant to engage with that aspect of her life directly. The intimate nature of her work made him uncomfortable as her husband, even though he was trying to accept it as her independent career choice. The situation became more complex when Margaret suggested that her income could accelerate their ranch expansion plans significantly. She proposed purchasing an additional 200 acres from their neighbor and doubling their cattle herd within 6 months, investments that would transform their modest operation into a substantial business. Her enthusiasm for these improvements was genuine, but Samuel worried about becoming too dependent on money earned through work he couldn't fully embrace. Samuel's discomfort wasn't entirely about Margaret's profession, but also about the power imbalance her hidden wealth created. He'd married her believing they were entering an equal partnership where his land and skills balanced her modest financial contributions. Learning that she earned more in a month than he'd made in his best year changed his understanding of their relationship's fundamental dynamics and his role within it. Margaret seemed to sense Samuel's struggle and made efforts to bridge the gap between her two worlds. She began explaining the business aspects of her work, emphasizing client management, marketing strategies, and financial planning that paralleled traditional enterprises. Her professional approach helped Samuel see her career as legitimate business rather than something shameful. Though his emotional acceptance lagged behind his intellectual understanding, the turning point came when Margaret received a threatening message from a former client who'd discovered her location and was demanding money to keep her new life secret. The man had apparently hired someone to trace her move to the ranch and was now threatening to expose her to their rural community unless she paid him substantial sums. Margaret's terror at this threat revealed how vulnerable her dual life made both of them. Samuel's protective instincts overcame his moral reservations when he saw Margaret's genuine fear. She'd built a successful life through careful planning and hard work, and the thought of someone destroying it through blackmail outraged him more than her profession ever had. For the first time since her revelation, Samuel felt like Margaret's partner rather than her judge, and his response surprised both of them with its fierce protectiveness. Together, they developed a strategy to handle the blackmail threat that showcased their complementary skills. Margaret's business experience helped them document the threats and understand their legal options, while Samuel's local connections provided access to law enforcement officers who could address the situation discreetly. Their collaboration felt natural and effective, reminding both why their partnership had worked so well despite its unconventional origins. The resolution of the blackmail situation required Margaret to make difficult decisions about her career's future. The threatening client had exposed vulnerabilities in her carefully constructed privacy that made continuing her online work dangerous for both of them. After extensive discussion, Margaret decided to retire from adult entertainment and focus entirely on their ranch partnership, though the decision meant sacrificing substantial income. Samuel's reaction to Margaret's career sacrifice revealed how much his feelings had evolved. Instead of relief, he felt guilty that his discomfort had contributed to her decision to abandon profitable work she'd managed successfully for years. He began to understand that accepting Margaret completely meant supporting her choices rather than hoping she'd change them to match his preferences. Margaret's transition away from her online career created unexpected challenges for both of them. Without the emotional outlet and validation her work had provided, she became restless and occasionally depressed. The clients who'd appreciated her intelligence and conversation had fulfilled social needs that ranch life couldn't entirely replace. Samuel watched her struggle with this loss and felt responsible for contributing to her isolation. The financial impact of Margaret's career change also affected their expansion plans. Without her substantial online income, their growth projections became more conservative, requiring them to build their operation more slowly and carefully. Samuel appreciated the more balanced financial partnership, but recognized that Margaret had made significant sacrifices for their relationship's harmony. As autumn progressed toward winter, Samuel and Margaret found themselves rebuilding their partnership on more honest foundations. Margaret's openness about her past and her willingness to change her career for their relationship demonstrated commitment that went beyond their original practical arrangement. Samuel's acceptance of her complete history and his protective response to threats against her showed that his feelings had evolved far beyond business partnership. Their evening routines changed completely, with Margaret's former secretive hours becoming time for shared planning and conversation. The locked door that had symbolized distance between them remained open, and their discussions ranged from cattle breeding, strategies to Margaret's ideas for developing additional income, streams that complemented rather than competed with their ranch operations. Samuel realized that Margaret's revelation had ultimately strengthened their relationship by eliminating the barriers her secrecy had created. Understanding her complete reality allowed him to appreciate her intelligence, resourcefulness, and resilience more fully. The woman who'd successfully managed dual careers while protecting herself from exploitation was exactly the kind of partner who could help him build something lasting and significant. Winter's arrival brought unexpected intimacy to Samuel and Margaret's relationship as they worked together to prepare their expanded herd for the harsh weather ahead. Margaret's dedication to learning every aspect of ranch management impressed Samuel daily, and her analytical approach to problem-solving complemented his intuitive understanding of livestock and land management. The woman who'd once seemed like a desperate solution to his financial problems had become an irreplaceable partner whose contributions went far beyond money. Margaret's adjustment to life without her online career proved challenging but ultimately rewarding. She channeled her creativity and business skills into developing new revenue streams for their ranch, researching organic certification programs and direct-to-consumer marketing strategies that could increase their profit margins significantly. Her Chicago contacts provided access to high-end restaurants interested in sourcing premium beef, opening markets Samuel had never considered pursuing. The community's gradual acceptance of Margaret marked another significant change in their lives. Her contributions to local fundraising events, her expertise in organizing the county fair's food competitions, and her genuine interest in preserving rural traditions earned respect from neighbors who'd initially viewed her with suspicion. Samuel watched with pride as Margaret found her place within the tight-knit community that had become their shared home. Their personal relationship evolved more slowly, but with growing depth and authenticity. Margaret's vulnerability during her career transition revealed emotional needs she'd hidden behind professional competence, while Samuel's protective response to her challenges showed capacity for tenderness he doubted he possessed. Their conversations became more personal and less focused on business matters, though they maintained the practical partnership that had brought them together. Samuel's feelings toward Margaret had transformed completely from their arrangement's practical origins. Her intelligence, resilience, and unexpected warmth had created genuine affection that surprised him with its intensity. He found himself looking forward to their shared meals, enjoying Margaret's stories about her clients and her observations about rural life, and feeling protective of her in ways that went beyond their business partnership. Margaret's growing attachment to ranch life became evident in countless small ways that touched Samuel deeply. She began rising earlier to help with morning chores, learned to read weather patterns and cattle behavior, and took pride in improvements they made to their property. Her investment in their shared future went far beyond financial contributions to include emotional commitment that neither had expected when they'd entered their practical arrangement. The first real test of their evolved relationship came when Margaret's former Chicago life intruded unexpectedly. Her ex-husband appeared at their ranch, demanding money and threatening to expose her past to their community unless she paid him substantial sums. The man's aggressive behavior and obvious desperation created a crisis that forced both Samuel and Margaret to confront how much their relationship had changed since their marriage began. Samuel's response to the threat against Margaret revealed the depth of his transformed feelings. Without hesitation, he confronted Margaret's ex-husband with protective fury that surprised all three of them. His willingness to fight for Margaret's security and reputation demonstrated commitment that went far beyond their original business arrangement. Margaret watched Samuel defend her honor with an emotional response that showed how much she'd come to depend on his support and partnership. The resolution of Margaret's ex-husband's threats brought them closer together as they worked to protect their shared life from outside interference. They consulted lawyers, gathered evidence, and presented a united front that effectively ended the attempted extortion. Their collaboration during the crisis felt natural and supportive, like a genuine marriage facing external challenges rather than a business partnership dealing with complications. Spring's arrival brought new possibilities and challenges that tested their partnership in different ways. Margaret proposed expanding their operation to include agritourism, using her hospitality experience to develop farm stays and educational programs that could provide additional income while sharing rural life with urban visitors. Samuel initially resisted the idea of strangers on their property, but gradually recognized the financial and community benefits Margaret's proposal offered. Their first attempt at hosting visitors was awkward but educational, revealing both Margaret's skills at creating memorable experiences and Samuel's natural ability to share his knowledge about ranching and rural life. The guests' enthusiasm for their authentic ranch experience encouraged both partners and provided validation for Margaret's business instincts and Samuel's expertise. As their first year of marriage concluded, Samuel and Margaret had created something neither had expected when they'd entered their practical arrangement. Their partnership had evolved from desperate necessity to genuine affection, from careful business cooperation to intimate collaboration on shared dreams. The ranch had not only survived but thrived under their joint management, exceeding both their original projections and their individual capabilities. Margaret's locked door, which had once symbolized the distance and secrecy between them, remained permanently open as their relationship deepened into genuine intimacy. Their separate bedrooms gave way to shared space as they acknowledged the love that had grown from their unlikely beginning. The practical arrangement that had saved Samuel's ranch had transformed into a marriage based on mutual respect, shared goals, and unexpected affection. The community that had initially viewed their arrangement with suspicion came to regard Samuel and Margaret as an example of successful partnership. Their ranch became a model for sustainable agriculture and rural tourism, while their marriage demonstrated that love could grow from practical foundations when both partners contributed honestly and generously to their shared enterprise. Samuel often reflected on the desperate circumstances that had led him to advertise for a practical wife, amazed by the transformation that had resulted from what seemed like his last resort. Margaret had brought far more than financial salvation to his struggling ranch. She'd brought intelligence, creativity, and eventually love that had rebuilt not just his property, but his entire life. The destitute rancher who'd married for livestock had found a partner who'd given him everything he'd never dared to hope for, proving that sometimes the most unconventional beginnings could lead to the most meaningful endings.